In 1986, Daniel and Rebecca Carter checked into a remote honeymoon cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. They were 23 and 21, married just 6 hours, with their whole lives stretching ahead like an open road. The cabin's guest book shows they arrived at 4 p.m. on June 14th. By morning, their car was still there, their suitcases unpacked, champagne unopened, but Daniel and Rebecca were gone. For 38 years, their disappearance remained a mystery, until a renovation crew took a sledgehammer to the wrong wall. June 14th, 1986. Location: Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. Pine Shadow Cabin. The wedding had been perfect. A small ceremony at Willow Creek Baptist Church, Rebecca in her mother's dress, Daniel in his father's suit. Their friends threw rice as they ran to Daniel's restored 1976 Mustang, tin cans rattling behind them, "Just Married" painted on the rear window. The drive to Pine Shadow Cabin took 3 hours. They stopped once for gas in Asheville, where the attendant would later remember them clearly. Young, laughing, couldn't keep their hands off each other. Real lovebirds, he'd tell police, the kind that made you believe in happy endings. Pine Shadow Cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by dense forest. Built in 1952, it had hosted hundreds of honeymoons. The owner, Earl Hutchinson, 68 and hard of hearing, lived in the main house a quarter-mile away. He handed them the key with a wink. "Won't bother you kids unless the place catches fire." Daniel carried Rebecca over the threshold at 4:17 p.m. She'd insisted on checking her watch to remember the exact moment their marriage truly began. They'd planned to stay 3 nights before driving to Florida for the real honeymoon. Daniel's parents had paid for Disney World. Rebecca had never been. The last confirmed sighting of them was at 6:30 p.m., when a passing hiker saw them on the cabin's porch, sharing a beer and watching the sunset. The hiker, Marcus Webb, remembered because Daniel had called out a friendly greeting, and Rebecca had waved. They looked, he said later, like the happiest people in the world. June 15th, 1986. Location: Pine Shadow Cabin. 10 a.m. Earl Hutchinson knocked 3 times, then used his master key. Checkout was at 9, and the Carter's car was still parked outside. He figured they'd overslept. Honeymooners often did. The cabin was pristine. Too pristine. The bed was still made with military corners. The champagne sat in its gift basket, unopened. Rebecca's wedding dress hung in the closet, Daniel's suit beside it. Their suitcases were open, but barely disturbed. On the kitchen table sat an uneaten dinner. 2 steaks cold and congealed, salad wilted, candles burned down to nubs. But no Daniel. No Rebecca. Earl searched the property, calling their names. He checked the hiking trails, the creek, even the old mine shaft that had been boarded up since the 50s. Nothing. At noon, he called the sheriff. Deputy Roy Patterson arrived at 2 p.m. He'd worked the mountains for 20 years, seen plenty of missing hikers who turned up embarrassed a day later. But this felt different. The dinner table troubled him. Who prepares a romantic meal then vanishes before eating it? He found no signs of struggle, no blood, no forced entry. Daniel's wallet was on the dresser with $200 cash. Rebecca's purse sat beside it, her grandmother's pearl necklace visible inside. The car keys hung on a hook by the door. The only thing out of place was a single champagne flute on the floor near the fireplace, unbroken but lying on its side. And on the fireplace mantel, their Polaroid camera with one photo already developed, the 2 of them at the church, hours before they disappeared. June 1986 to September 2024. The years between. The search lasted 3 weeks. State police, park rangers, volunteer search teams with dogs. They dragged the lake 2 miles away, searched every cave and crevice. The FBI briefly investigated when someone suggested it might be connected to other disappearances in national parks, but found no pattern. Daniel's parents hired private investigators who found nothing. Rebecca's mother visited psychics who offered vague visions of water and darkness. Their friends held vigils that first year, then stopped. People moved on, as people do. The cabin continued operating. Earl told guests about the disappearance only if they asked about the small memorial plaque he'd installed by the door. Most honeymooners didn't want to hear ghost stories. When Earl died in 1998, His nephew Tom inherited the property. He was less sentimental, more business-minded. He renovated the other cabins, but left Pine Shadow mostly untouched, renting it out as a historical mountain retreat. The case went cold, then frozen, then forgotten by everyone except the families. Daniel's mother died in 2010, still wearing a yellow ribbon pin for her missing son. Rebecca's father spent his retirement savings on one last private investigator in 2015, who found nothing new. The Mustang was eventually towed, sold, junked. The wedding photos gathered dust in attics. Daniel and Rebecca Carter became statistics, 2 more names in the endless list of the disappeared. September 8, 2024. Location: Pine Shadow Cabin. Tom Hutchinson was finally doing what he'd planned for years, a complete renovation of Pine Shadow. The cabin had good bones but needed updating. New plumbing, new electrical, and that drafty stone fireplace had to go. It had never drawn properly anyway. The crew from Mountain Home Renovations arrived Monday morning. Jake Lawson, the foreman, had renovated dozens of old cabins. He knew they all had quirks, weird additions, amateur repairs, sometimes a still hidden in the basement from Prohibition days. It was his nephew, Tyler, swinging the sledgehammer, who noticed it first. "Uncle Jake, this wall sounds different." The stone fireplace was massive, built from local river rock, but when Tyler tapped behind it with his hammer, one section echoed hollow. Jake examined it closer. The mortar was different there, newer, sloppier, like someone had sealed something in a hurry. "Let's open it up," Jake said. It took 3 hours to carefully remove the stones. Behind them was not the expected brick backing, but a wooden door, painted black to blend with the soot. The door was locked with a padlock that had rusted, but not failed. Jake called Tom Hutchinson. Tom called the police. September 8, 2024, 3 p.m. Location: Pine Shadow Cabin. Sheriff Diana Webb, no relation to the 1986 hiker, arrived with a forensics team. The padlock was cut. The door swung open on hinges that screamed with decades of disuse. Behind the fireplace was a room, 8 feet by 10 feet, carved directly into the mountain rock. The walls were lined with soundproofing material, now rotted and hanging in strips. A battery-powered lantern sat in the corner, long dead. 2 sleeping bags on the floor, moldy and flat. Canned goods stacked against one wall, labels faded beyond reading. And on the far wall, scratched into the stone with something sharp, were words that made Webb's blood run cold. Daniel and Rebecca Carter, June 14th to 17th, 1986. We were not alone. He was in the walls. Below that, in different handwriting, shakier. He comes at night, watches through the cracks. This is day 3 or 4. Daniel stopped responding yesterday. I think he's dying. If someone finds this, tell our families we loved them. Tell them we fought. Rebecca Webb called for additional units and a full forensic sweep. Over the next 12 hours, they dismantled half the cabin and found the horrifying truth. The entire structure was honeycombed with passages, narrow crawl spaces between walls, peepholes drilled through knots in wood, a whole network that allowed someone to move through the cabin unseen. In one crawl space, they found a journal wrapped in plastic. The first entry was dated 1983. The writer identified himself only as the Watcher. He described observing dozens of couples over 3 years, learning their routines, their intimacies. He wrote about selecting special ones for his collection. Daniel and Rebecca were mentioned by name. June 14th, new subjects arrived, young, beautiful, perfect for the collection. We'll wait until they sleep. But something had gone wrong. The journal's tone shifted to panic. They fought back. The male is stronger than expected. Had to use more chloroform. Moved them to the keeping room, but the male is having reactions, breathing problems. This wasn't supposed to happen. The final entry. June 17th, male subject expired. Female subject uncontrollable. Cannot complete collection. Will have to clean and reset. Moving to contingency plan. September 10th, 2024. Location, North Carolina State Crime Lab. The DNA results came back quickly. The sleeping bags contained genetic material from both Daniel and Rebecca Carter. There was third DNA profile, unknown, not in any database. More disturbing were the photographs found hidden in a metal box in the crawl space. Dozens of Polaroids of couples in the cabin, taken through the peepholes. Most were innocent, people sleeping, cooking, sitting by the fire. But 16 photos taken over 3 years showed couples who were clearly unconscious, posed, with someone's hand visible in the frame adjusting their positions. 8 of those couples had been reported missing between 1983 and 1986. The sheriff's department cross-referenced missing persons reports with the cabin's guest registry. The matches were horrifying. Every couple in the photos had vanished within days of checking out. Or rather, they'd never actually checked out at all. September 12, 2024. Location: Asheville, North Carolina, County Records Office. Detective Sarah Chen dug through property records, building permits, and tax documents. Pine Shadow Cabin had been built in 1952 by Harold McAllister, a reclusive carpenter who'd lived on the property until his death in 1959. The cabin then sold to Earl Hutchinson's father, who'd operated it as a rental until Earl took over in 1970. But there was a gap. From 1959 to 1963, the property had been owned by someone named William Garrett. The same name appeared on the original building permits for the cabin. But William Garrett had supposedly died in 1958, a year before he bought the property. Chen dug deeper. William Garrett had been Harold McAllister's nephew, reported missing in 1958, declared dead in 1965. But someone using his name had lived on that property for 4 years, made modifications to the cabin, modifications that created the network of crawl spaces. The revelation came from an archived newspaper article from 1963. Local man dies in house fire. The body had been identified as William Garrett, but the identification had been based on personal effects, not physical features. The body had been too burned. Chen made the connection. Harold McAllister had never died in 1959. He'd faked his death, assumed his missing nephew's identity, and continued living on the property. He'd built the passages, the hidden room, the infrastructure for voyeurism that had evolved into something deadlier. But McAllister's Shure Garrett had supposedly died in 1963. Who had been taking couples from 1983 to 1986? September 15, 2024. Location: Mountain View Nursing Home, Boone, North Carolina. The answer came from an unexpected source. Gladys Hutchinson, Earl's widow, 93 and sharp as a tack. When shown a photo of Harold McAllister, she gasped. "That's Eddie," she said. "Earl's cousin Eddie. Slow Eddie," Earl called him. Not mean, but not right either. Eddie Hutchinson. Earl's cousin, who'd helped maintain the cabins, lived in a trailer on the property and disappeared the same week Daniel and Rebecca went missing. Earl had told police Eddie had gone to find work in Tennessee, but no one had ever verified it. Eddie was obsessed with that cabin, Gladys continued, always volunteering to clean it, fix things. Earl thought he was just helpful. But looking back, she shuddered. He knew every inch of that place. The FBI ran facial recognition on old photos of Eddie Hutchinson against unidentified bodies. They got a match from a John Doe in Florida, died in 1987, buried in a potter's field. The body had been found in a stolen car with fake identification. He'd been running. September 20th, 2024. Location: Blue Ridge Mountains, search site. Based on the journal's reference to contingency plan and cleaning, search teams focused on areas within a mile of the cabin. Cadaver dogs were brought in, ground-penetrating radar deployed. They found them on September 22nd. 9 bodies in total, buried in a natural cave formation that had been artificially expanded. The remains were in various states of decomposition, but DNA testing confirmed what everyone already knew. Daniel and Rebecca Carter were among them, along with 7 other people who'd vanished from the area between 1983 and 1986. Rebecca had been shot once in the head, execution style. Daniel showed signs of chloroform poisoning. He'd likely died from an allergic reaction during the initial kidnapping, just as the journal described. The others showed various causes of death. None had died naturally. October 1st, 2024. Location: Willow Creek Baptist Church. 38 years after their wedding, Daniel and Rebecca Carter finally had their funeral in the same church where they'd said, "I do." The pews were packed. Old friends, now middle-aged, came to say goodbye. Their siblings, gray-haired now, served as pallbearers. Rebecca's sister Michelle gave the eulogy. She talked about how Rebecca had spent months planning the perfect wedding, the perfect honeymoon, how she'd been so excited to start her life with Daniel, how she'd called Michelle the morning of the wedding and said, "Today, everything begins." She was right, Michelle said, tears streaming. Everything did begin that day, a mystery that took 38 years to solve, a grief that never ended, but also, in a strange way, a love story that became immortal. They were together when they died. They were found together. And now they'll be buried together. Not the ending they deserved, but an ending nonetheless. The FBI investigation continued. They identified Eddie Hutchinson as the killer, but suspected he hadn't acted entirely alone. The sophisticated nature of the cabin's modifications suggested knowledge of construction, planning, perhaps even an accomplice. But with Eddie dead since 1987, those secrets died with him. Tom Hutchinson demolished Pine Shadow Cabin completely. The site was blessed by 3 different religious leaders, then planted with wildflowers. A memorial stands there now, listing the names of the 9 victims found. But locals say if you walk the old dirt road on summer evenings, especially in June, you can sometimes hear laughter echoing through the trees. Young laughter, joyful and free. The sound of newlyweds who thought they had forever, carried on a mountain wind that remembers everything, even happiness that lasted only hours before the darkness came. The other cabins still operate. Couples still come for honeymoons, anniversaries, romantic getaways. They don't talk about Pine Shadow, about the room behind the fireplace, about the watcher in the walls. But sometimes, late at night, they triple-check their locks and wonder about every creak, every shadow, every sound that might be footsteps where no footsteps should be. Because now everyone knows the truth that took 38 years to uncover. Sometimes the walls really are watching. And sometimes love stories end before they even begin, leaving only questions carved in stone and names that echo in the darkness, waiting decades to be found.